The Colosseum did not begin with a noble oath or a heroic duel. It began with a business model, pain converted into applause, and applause converted into power. When we speak of gladiators, we often picture legends. Rome saw something far colder: bodies, contracts, and crowds. Tonight, we peel back the marble mask and reveal what the games truly were: a machine that fed on fear and fascination. Behind every shining helmet was a human being who could bleed, break, and beg. This is the dark truth about ancient Rome's gladiators. To understand the arena, we must first understand Rome's society, an empire of extremes. It offered dazzling wealth to a few and relentless hardship to many, and it demanded spectacle as a kind of public religion. In the center stood the Colosseum, stone and ambition stacked into a monument to mass entertainment. Its arches promised excitement, but they also warned the people. The state could reward, and the state could destroy. The games were often funded by emperors or ambitious politicians seeking popularity. Free grain-filled stomachs, blood-filled conversation. In a city where politics could feel distant, the arena felt immediate, loud, visible, unforgettable. The Romans called it munus, duty, as if violence were an obligation owed to the public. It began as funerary ritual, then evolved into staged slaughter on an industrial scale. By the 1st century AD, the games were a central pillar of Roman identity. But who were the gladiators? Not a single class of men, but a grim spectrum. Prisoners of war, condemned criminals, enslaved laborers, and desperate volunteers all entered the same system. The arena did not care how you arrived, only how you performed. Rome's world was connected by roads and conquest, and those roads carried human cargo. In Pompeii, the ruins preserved not only grand villas, but the cramped spaces where fighters were held and trained. The stones still whisper of confinement. Gladiators were managed like assets. Their owners, Lanistae, were trainers, recruiters, and profiteers. They purchased bodies, repaired them, and rented them to sponsors. A dead fighter could be a financial loss, which is why many bouts were designed for survival as much as drama. Yet the danger was real, always. Even controlled violence can slip into chaos in a single heartbeat. The arena demanded convincing fear, convincing pain, convincing stakes. And every gladiator knew that not always is not the same as never. Chapter 2 begins where the tourists never stand, inside the training schools, the ludi. There the fighters woke before dawn to drill until their arms shook. Wooden practice swords were heavier than the real blades. Training was designed to exhaust you before the enemy did. The best evidence of their lives is not myth, it is material. In museums you can study real helmets, greaves, and shields, scarred by impact and repaired again and again. These objects are not props. They are records of repeated survival. Gladiators ate a diet meant for endurance: grains, beans, and often ash-based supplements to strengthen bones. They were athletes, yes, but athletes owned by others. Their bodies were engineered for performance, then risked for someone else's pleasure. Most lived behind bars. Training schools could resemble prisons with courtyards. Rooms were cramped, privacy almost non-existent, and discipline harsh. Violence was not only performed, it was enforced. Injuries were constant: fractured ribs, deep cuts, concussions, infected wounds. Doctors patched fighters with needles, bandages, and cautery, medicine in service of spectacle. A healed gladiator was not a saved life, he was a restored investment. Some gladiators formed brotherhoods, others lived in bitter rivalry. They trained together, but they also competed for better matchups, better pay, and better chances to live. In a system built on dominance, even friendship could become a survival strategy. Outside the schools, the empire itself offered reminders of Rome's reach: ruins, roads, aqueducts, and fortifications. These stones were built by labor, funded by conquest, and defended by violence. Gladiators were a small part of a much larger machinery of control. What about freedom? Rome dangled it like a distant light at the end of a tunnel. Some fighters earned a wooden sword, the rudis, symbolizing release. But freedom did not erase scars, and it did not guarantee safety in a society that still saw you as entertainment. And then there were the volunteers, the octorati, men who signed contracts to fight. Debt, ambition, addiction to fame, or sheer desperation pushed them into the sand. In Rome, even choice could be a form of coercion. By the time a gladiator entered the arena, he carried more than armor. He carried a biography of hardship, training bruises, fear of disgrace, fear of death, fear of the crowd's verdict. The arena was not a stage. It was a test of the body under social pressure. Chapter 3 begins with a misconception that gladiator combat was simply a fight. In reality, it was a carefully structured event with classes, matchmakers, referees, and rules. Rome's violence was theatrical, but it was also regulated. Inside the Colosseum, the architecture itself shaped emotion. Steep seats, narrow exits, a perfect bowl for sound. The crowd did not just watch. It participated, rising and falling like a living organism. The fighters below were trapped in a storm of attention. Different gladiator types created contrast. The retiarius fought with net and trident, fast and exposed. The secutor pursued him in heavy armor, shield raised, breathing through narrow eye holes. These pairings were designed to tell a story without words. A match could end in surrender. A defeated fighter might raise a finger to signal submission. But submission was not mercy. It was a pause, an appeal to the sponsor and the crowd. And sometimes, mercy had a price. The famous thumbs down is mostly modern imagination. Ancient sources describe gestures and shouted signals, but they are ambiguous. What is certain is the power imbalance. A man's life could hinge on spectators who would never smell the blood. When death was ordered, it was not always quick. Some accounts describe ritualized finishing blows, meant to be clean, meant to be definitive. Even killing became choreography, performed for the eyes of the empire. Beyond duels, Rome staged venations, hunts where animals and humans were pitted against each other. Exotic beasts were imported from Africa and the East, turning conquest into spectacle. The arena became a map of empire without needing any map at all. Lions, bears, leopards, proof of reach. Sometimes the show was architecture itself, elaborate sets, props, and traps beneath the sand. Stone corridors and wooden mechanisms moved cages and platforms upward in seconds. The arena was not only violent, it was technologically sophisticated. Executions could be disguised as mythological scenes, criminals forced to play doomed roles. To the crowd, it was entertainment. To the condemned, it was terror dressed as theater. Rome taught morality through fear, and it made fear profitable. The crowd's appetite was fickle. A slow fight could be booed, even if it was strategic. A brutal exchange could ignite cheers, even if it shortened a life. The audience did not want truth, they wanted emotion. Some gladiators became icons. Their names were painted on walls, their faces molded into souvenirs. Merchants sold snacks, trinkets, and memorabilia, an ancient entertainment industry. But fame never guaranteed safety. It only raised expectations. And still, the fighters endured, because endurance was the only currency they controlled. A courageous performance could earn mercy. A cowardly one could invite a fatal verdict. Rome pretended the arena rewarded virtue, but the rules were written by power. We can see the culture of violence preserved in objects, blades, armor, and ceremonial gear displayed today. When you stand before these weapons, the distance between history and harm collapses. They are beautiful, and that is part of the danger. Gladiatorial combat did not exist in isolation. It reflected Rome's legal system, its class hierarchy, and its imperial conquest. It taught the crowd what strength looked like, what weakness deserved, and who had the right to decide. The arena was propaganda with a heartbeat. When we strip away the glamour, one truth remains. The games normalized suffering. They trained citizens to watch pain without flinching, and to celebrate dominance as entertainment. That normalization is the darkest legacy of all. Chapter 4 begins with decline. As Rome's economy strained and its borders faltered, the cost of massive spectacles grew harder to justify. Political instability shifted priorities, and the mood of the empire changed. The roar that once unified the city began to fade. New religious and moral frameworks also challenged the game. Some leaders argued that public killing was incompatible with emerging ideals of mercy and dignity. But change was slow, and violence has a way of reinventing itself. Today, the Colosseum still stands, reimagined as a symbol of heritage rather than horror. Tourists photograph its arches, often unaware of the human cost embedded in stone. The monument survives, while the victims' names largely do not. When gladiator schools finally closed, the culture did not simply vanish, it transformed. Public punishments continued. Animal hunts persisted. Spectacle migrated into other forms. Rome proved a lesson repeated across history. Entertainment follows power. So what do gladiators mean to us now? Not as heroes, but as evidence. They show how a society can admire strength while consuming the vulnerable. They reveal the cost of turning human beings into content. Modern stadiums and screens are not ancient arenas, but they can echo the same impulses. We still gather to watch bodies pushed to extremes. We still reward violence with attention. The question is not whether we are Rome, but how close we allow ourselves to become. Even the evidence of gladiators' world survives in fragments. Faded murals, worn carvings, battered artifacts. These remnants remind us that behind every spectacle were real lives, reduced to moments in someone else's memory. History is often written in stone, but suffering is written on bodies. If there is one honest lesson, it is this. Rome did not invent cruelty, but it perfected its presentation. It built a system where violence was organized, scheduled, monetized, and celebrated. That is why the gladiators are not just a story. They are a warning about what crowds can normalize. In the end, the gladiator was both feared and adored, both human and symbol. The empire demanded a performance, and it paid with survival until it stopped paying. When the cheers faded, what remained were ruins and unanswered questions. Walk the ruins today, and you may feel only wonder. Look closer, and you can feel the silence beneath it. The stones still stand, but the truth they witnessed is easy to forget. Remember the gladiators not as legends, but as people caught inside a spectacle that outlived them.